So suppose we want to individualize with drill and practice. Now, people like to say, oh, drill and kill, that's so terrible. Well, the kids loved it when we were doing it. It was better than being bored or being or being lost in the classroom. The kids were receiving all those items that were individually chosen for them, and they liked it. This is back in teletypewriter days, and it's gotten better because now we can show pictures. Although we've gotten to be, we have this Cecil DeMille tendency in some of our materials, and so we might as well be back in educational television. Getting the interactions that we need. But still, drill and practice is something I want to say something about because it was serious and it worked. And I'm building up to a little conclusion here in case you wonder where all this is going. So what we developed, something called the Strands Approach. There are other approaches to drill and practice, that's fine. But you start with an excruciating detailed analysis of the subject. And you break it up into activities. And I'll show you an example of that in a second. And then you provide supplementary individualized instruction approach for each student's level of achievement, acceleration, repeated practice, a daily profile reporting each student's progress. Now that's kind of fun because you can give to the kid and to the teachers exactly where they are on a day-to-day basis. As a matter of fact, you can do it on a second-to-second basis if you want to do it, because anytime you want to, you can push a button and get the report out, showing where the kid is, what the kid knows and what it doesn't know. And the teachers who began to use those in the classroom, well, we can tell the difference between the teachers who are using those reports in the classroom and those who weren't by grades and things like that. So this little business of reporting each student progress turns out to be important. And you don't have to wait until grade 4 and grade 8 to find out how the kids are doing this. When I was a boy. So here's what we did in math. So you start with something like numbers and number concepts, and that goes from grade 1 to grade 8. You can really do that. I mean, there are some serious notions about number theory that we're teaching even at grade 8. And then you dribble down, as you might expect, horizontal addition, and then horizontal subtraction, horizontal addition, to one column, and then finally 2 columns, and 3 columns, and so forth. And the same thing with subtraction, and so forth. Equations that get around in the second half of first grade. There's stuff you can do, and it works. And so forth all the way down here, and get negative numbers down here in grade 6. We probably could have done that sooner according to the data we saw. But anyways, that's how we divvied up mathematics. I say we did the same thing with reading, beginning reading, which was roughly, we did a sort of, well, it's pre-K actually, all the way up to about 3rd grade. And you start with letters and then regular words, like nan, can, fan, dan, which isn't actually, that's Bloomfield, which is not actually, it's not all that regular, because we don't say nan, can, fan, dan, we say nan, can, fan, dan, but it's close enough. Anyways, that was math, and then we figured out, okay, we got these strands, what is the proportion of time we ought to give to the strand, and what are the proportion of problems we ought to give to it. And so we would figure this out. And this began to get semi-scientific. This was, after all, the Institute for Mathematical Studies and Social Sciences. So we would get into that business. And those of you who are pretty smart about this will notice that this column, things in this column here add up to 100%, and these don't. That's because I haven't done I haven't thrown in all the strands that we were teaching. That's just an aside. If we're really clever about allocating time to individual students, then we should be able to set up a system whereby for a class of students, we can estimate how long it's going to take each student to achieve a certain level. This is a different kind of evaluation. This is not the usual control group, experimental group, horse race. This says that if the course is doing anything, then there ought to be a very close relationship between the time they spent in it and their achievement on a standardized test. And that's what we found. We found out that this would predict plus or minus 1/10 of a grade placement solely on the basis of the time in CBI. And so there's a very, very tight fit around these curves. Yeah, we had a lot of fun with regression equations and stuff like that. But that was mathematics studies and social sciences. This is pretty good. A grade placement doesn't really mean actually being in that grade. but it's a very nice, but you set that aside, it turns out to be a very nice standard score. It's well standardized and tractable. And then we got into optimization. Yes, we were looking at operations research. You know about operations research. What you do is you take everything that's difficult to measure, you set that aside, and you build this imposing mathematical structure of what's left. And, you know, it must be us. That's what we did. But it kind of worked. It kind of worked. So here's how Pat Soupy's laid it out. It said, assume a large number of items as to be learned in a fixed time t. What item or problems do you select for each student at any given moment to maximize learning subject to the constraints provided by the time you have to give it and the full thing? So how do you want to maximize their knowledge of a whole bunch of problems? It fits itself very well to drill and practice kinds of issues. And so we did that. And we have a nice little model of memory, and I'm not going to, I won't go into this too much, but it was just a three-state thing. It's learn, short time, unlearn. Learn, if you knew the thing, then the probability of getting it correct next time around was going to be 1. It wasn't going to drop back to the short term of the unlearned state. If it's short-term state, then it had a probability of leaping up to the learned state with probability C and staying in the short-term state with, of course, 1 minus C and so forth. Unlearned, so you can even leap up from unlearned to learn with probability A. And then we have probabilities of guessing, and we have some of these probabilities of what the state of the item would be when it's not presented, which dealt with forgetting or other things coming in. It was all great fun stuff. And we would estimate these parameters, C, A, and B, and F, and all that, for a student and an item combination. We could actually do that. So we got to be quite efficient about trying to maximize the number of items a student will learn in the time available. There's a body of literature about that, and you really don't want me to show it to you. Mostly because I don't think I can stack it through the math anymore either, so it's fair enough. But there was stuff going on with paper, and this will be more familiar to you. Keller's personalized system of instruction. You break everything up into modules, you give a pretest, if the kid passes the pretest, you skip the module, fails the pretest, they go into the module, at the end of the module, you test them again, and they pass that test, they go on, if they don't pass it, they go back up and do the module again. That was Keller's idea. Very good idea. Kulik did a meta-analysis of all this stuff and found that it had an effect size of 0.5, which means that overall, it was raising the performance of your 50th percentile student up to about the 69th percentile. So it was, it was good stuff. And of course, Keller wrote this paper and said, "Goodbye, teacher." And then about 15 years later, he said, "Lightning strikes twice," because he discovered all the work it took to produce those tests, both the pre-test and the post-test. It was just, the administrators weren't giving the teachers any credit for that time, and it was the end of it. So that was Keller's PSI. It was just too much work, again, for a classroom teacher to deal with. And then, of course, you got Crowder's intrinsic programming, which, of course, we've all seen. The number, you give a question or a statement or something like that up here, and then you ask a question about it. And then if they get it right, you go to the next. You say, whoopee, you did it right, you go on to the next. But if they don't, then you figure out what they don't know, and then you branch to appropriate remediation based on what they don't know. And that's Crowder's intrinsic programming, and I claim that that is really the backbone of most of the programming that we have in computer-based instruction and in learning in general. Skinner deserves a lot of credit for pushing this along, but this ain't Skinner. This is Crowder. So it's I think Crowder deserves more credit for it. And so nowadays we have stuff where both are combined. Outside the module you have Keller, and then inside the module you have Crowder.